out, so I may have to go and put them back in. Is that right if I do that? Because they're going to start barking. He's in charge out there. I'll be
it's all good. If they okay, no worries. I'll just talk on the decision table.
Please do. I'll be right there.
Welcome everyone to the decision table. We have dog issues right now, and you know, it's all good. Anything goes on the decision table, as you know. Hey, I've been having a few days of quiet, and I needed to do that. I needed to refuel a little bit, and I don't know about you, but I know for me, when I'm talking to people all the time, I love people, I love humans, but sometimes I just need that moment where I'm like, I need some space and not to think anymore. And I'm using my brain a lot these days. So I've really enjoyed having a few days of quiet, not having to do the decision table, but I'm excited because we've got someone on the decision table today that I reckon we're going to have a pretty good conversation about anything and everything. Wendy, so good to have you here. I'm excited about our conversation because I know we've had other conversations and they went into very interesting directions. And I'm looking forward to that. You know, and particularly because this month, the lens we're using, so we don't necessarily have to have certain questions we ask or any agendas that we're going down, but we do use lenses here on the decision table. And this month, the lens is around humanity as stakeholders at the decision table. And it's kind of like the pinnacle to everything that I talk about and are about. Because I think there's this, you know, in society right now, one of our biggest issues is that we're forgetting that, number one, we should be going back to humans and humanity. And what does that really look like? When I say that, what does that conjure up in your brain? Where do you go with that?
That we should be going back to humanity.
Yeah.
Yes, basically.
Tell me more about that.
Well, that's a huge statement.
I know, that's why I want us to talk about it.
And I do have quite a bigger picture thinking, like I can do both. But do you want to know where humanity is now? Like we bring it back to humanity at this time?
Sort of our starting point? Yeah.
Where we're up to at this time. Is that right?
Where do you think we're up to?
Where I perceive we're up to at this time. Well, I think we've lost our way to a degree. I think we're on it. But then I had a very interesting conversation with a man who studied in India for many years, and I expressed my lament, if that's the right word, at where humanity was up to. And he said to me, he said in all his study in India with the sages was that it's okay, he said, because the world is still very much in its narcissistic phase, that all of us are narcissistic, and that everything would be okay. And that was more or less what he said. So I straight away went to this long line of continuum that as we're all narcissistic, and we're all thinking, oh, but I need that. And I'm an ocean girl. So because I grew up around the ocean, and I think I'm returning to the ocean as well as I get older. But I remember when fish oil came in, and I remember looking up there from my island, small island in Bass Strait context, and I noticed that, you know, there were more and more bottles of fish oil on the shelves in shops, and you'd say to people, and people would say, you're taking fish oil, and you'd think, now where's all this fish oil coming from, you know, and what is it? And I learned not even to trust that there was fish oil in those fish oil bottles, but that food was food that people took because they now believed that it was going to contribute to their health, but it had a lot to do with education and how people receive the messages for what we need. And we all do that, but it appeals to our narcissistic and I don't mean that in an insulting way, because I am an art therapist and an artist, and I have worked for years with people, and I know where the pendulum swings extra wide, but it's whether you know where you're going with it. We all know that we're narcissistic. We have narcissistic traits, I should say.
Do we though? Do we? Or is this something that you're bringing to our awareness today?
Maybe it is, but and maybe it's not the right term. Maybe the narcissism is it's a deficit term rather than, maybe there's another term that we could come up with.
So let's pull that apart, because what is it about that you think, or you relate it to us?
I think it's a part of our, well, I don't want to sound too vague, but I think for some people, but I think you do have a really good audience, is that I think it's our consciousness. How conscious are we of what is going on? And at every age and stage, we have a level of consciousness that's coming, and then there's a level of unconsciousness that remains there. And every stage of life has got its awakenings. And, if we get through from stage 1, 2 and 3, and we get through to stage 4 and 5, but we haven't done some earlier, then that makes it difficult. But then that's taking the conversation somewhere else. I'm just saying that to demonstrate that the levels of unconsciousness that we have through our life. I hope that,
So tell me more about the levels of consciousness that we have in life. So if we are at a starting point, because that's where we began with humanity, going, what is our starting point? Are we as humanity, is our problem that you see that we are in all these different stages and we're not relating in that, or we are stuck at stage 1? Like, what do you mean by that? I'd love to know more.
We grow up. We come into the world, and I think we often come in with a lot more, but it's not, doesn't have words, if you like. Right. We'll leave it in that basket. Then we grow up into the world through our different stages. We're growing up and into the world. And in an ideal world, or a world where we were in that, where our consciousness could just flow and we didn't have the push pull that we have, then we instead of us growing up to use nature the way we do, we would be part of it and become more. And I think we come here to become. I've got a book that I found in a bag that I'd bought years ago, and I hadn't read, and I popped it in the front cover, and I went to put that bag somewhere, and I thought, I better check that. There's something in the front. And here was this book, and it was called Becoming Animal. And I thought, oh, my God, I remember being so excited to read that book. And I've only just started it now, and it is very interesting because it's kind of, we've been taken off to so many different places through religion and through all sorts of different things, media and politicians and everything else. And, that becoming animal is becoming a part of nature rather than seeing nature as something that you just use and consume, but you are part of it. So that's the subtle difference. And to me, that's where our health is. And that's where our consciousness, that's where we arrive as much as we can in this existence of being fully conscious, I think, is when we become part of, not the benefactor of, or the everything else.
Yeah. So even if you think of that, the benefactor of, or we're not consciously thinking, or, intentionally being a part of, rather than it's a use and we need this and it's a want or whatever. Bring that right into the concept around the Indigenous. I know you do a lot of Indigenous work, and I would have to think that this kind of bridges into that conversation.
It does very, very much so. like there's things in Indigenous cultures that, you know, I'm always very careful what I say because you mustn't talk as though you know too much, and you mustn't talk like that. That's just the unspoken stuff that I've picked up, because they're still working out, you know, here I think they are still a lot. They're getting there. They're quite amazing, really. But they're working out who they are. Like if you've played some of those games where they, you know, you choose, you take a stone, and if it's a blue one, then you're the invaders, and if it's a red one, then you're the Indigenous person. It can happen anywhere. And how once you are begun to be manipulated in whatever form, you can never get back to the family and to the culture you had before entirely. So those that have been taken over and rearranged and excommunicated, those that were in opposition, they have to find a new way back. You know, they have to find another way back and try to reconstruct from what was the crumbs that were left often. Which
can they see a new way back? Is there a way back? Are we any closer to being able to create that pathway?
I think I don't think that, like, it's funny because I did actually I did offer art at a place called J Block in Launceston, which was like years 11 and 12, which was like a drop-in centre for the Aboriginal youth. And I remember I said, I'll only do this if you put in a silk screen table, so that, you know, just a big table with cloth, and I could run cloth on it, and instead of saying, here's a piece of A4 or A3 paper, just ran the cloth, and then you had the paints, and then you kind of slap some on, and they'd all come and do it, you see. And that's always been one of my things that I've loved, to push the boundaries. And the headmaster came at the end of the year and he said, look, I want you to be here next year, and I want you to put together a body of work with these kids, and we'll tour it around Tasmania. We might even take it further, right?
Wow.
So he went back to his office, and I started talking to the kids, and do you know what they said? We don't want to do Aboriginal art. We want to do our art. And if we want to call it Aboriginal art, we'll call it Aboriginal art, but we don't want to do that. And I found that so interesting. So it didn't actually happen. I mean, I think
So sorry, I just want to push on that one, because is that meaning then that the gap between where we need to be and the gap where we are is getting wider because we're not willing to see that there's other pathways to get there?
No, I think they're coming to terms. Like, the older people have got.
But are they? Because I think that's a brilliant idea. We know that's a brilliant idea. You're engaging in a way that is so close to the Indigenous. Like, you know, you think of in the caves, they didn't have A4 paper there. They got the paint and they did whatever, you know, wherever, on the face, whatever it is. Like, it wasn't that you got out the paper. We've got to bridge this gap between what we know or have, and in your words, manipulated, right? And bridge that gap between that to maybe there's other ways in which we can bring pathways that we're never going to get back to the original of what it's like, but we can go, this is a beautiful way to combine it so that we can all keep moving forward.
I actually think that I don't know, I've not said this before, and I don't want it to sound like I walk around being angry, because I don't.
It's okay. By the way, there's no judgment zone on this decision table, because this is part of us evolving, right, is having these conversations.
That's right. Yes, no, I agree. But, like, I have to admit, and some of my family would, not Michelle, I don't think, but some of my family would be worried because they work closely with politicians.
Right.
But they're in their own way, they're doing their own thing, and I have great hope that they, you know, we're all awakeners of some kind. And But I feel that this COVID thing and everything else, people, the worst thing that can happen to mankind is to become more lemming-like, to kind of, do you know what I mean? Like, because even that, we apply to the government for funding, some government body for funding. The government decides, and years ago, I worked at Ashley, which was a youth detention, where I had an art room. They rang me up and said, would you come back after I did my teaching prac there? And they gave me this old dairy, which I took all the bars off the window and had all the walls painted lovely colours, lovely soft colours, and we put in a fire, and whenever they came there, they weren't in jail. And we just had the best time. And I was there for about 7 years, and I set up so they could continue their education, because I understood that they came back, like they'd come there for 2 weeks or 6 weeks, and then they'd go, and then they'd be back in a few days or in a week or two, because it was often the safest place for them. And after a few years, I thought, something has to change. I went to the schools board and I had these long rolls. They could come in and I'd say, right, where are you up to? And then in those days, there were one subject was divided into 4 units. So they could slowly work through, and then they'd actually get something in the mail saying they'd achieved that, which was just amazing. And in the end, one night I woke up and I had I drew this big map of how that institution could be turned into a developmental institution, how schools could, the university could, any teachers that were happy to go there could go there for their pracs, and how, the kids didn't have to be in the jail. They would be rewarded for taking responsibility for their own health, their own development, right?
Yeah.
But change the focus, rather than being a penal place. It was that, but it would have to have one part somewhere that would be far less the focus and the threat and everything else. But if you're engaged in development, then your life could be quite pleasant. In fact, you could be achieving things. And other countries like Finland, they don't put many, very, very few of their young people go to are incarcerated. Instead, they put someone with them, and they go to work, and they do a traineeship or something, and then if the child can't go or the young person can't go, that staff person goes and does the job, so the employer isn't disadvantaged. So there's all those kind of things. So I did this big map, and I took it in to the manager, and I showed him, and he said, you need to go in and show the big boss that. So I made an appointment, and I went into town, and this person went and made a copy of it, put it in his drawer. And then I went back, and the boss said, they want to see you down in Hobart. I'm going to take you down to see the politicians. So I went down, and it was just before an election. So I went down there, and this politician, I went in and showed him the map, and he was quite excited, and he took a copy of it too. And then we went back, and I remember one day, a couple of weeks later, he came up and visited. And I remember when I walked into the room, he turned around like this, and he looked, and you could see. But I realised that all they were doing was trying to work out how that would help them get in next time.
Yeah.
So like 3 weeks later, I went into the manager's office, and I said to him, so is my map in the left drawer or the right drawer? And he said, oh, Wendy, he said, I think it's in the left drawer now, because the election's over. And I said, oh, well, here's my resignation. So, and I left, you see, but not before I'd done an exhibition in town called A Society of Heads, which was, these kids had made all these clay heads which were put on plinths, and that was put on in the same place that the recognised artists put on their exhibitions in Launceston. And I loved that, because there were a couple of instances where there would be a social worker, and the kids used to get angry when they'd seen the social workers, because I don't think they felt they were there to help them. They were there to tick all the boxes and do all that stuff. And, you know, one boy said to me, she looked at me after she looked at my head like she was seeing me for the first time. You see?
Interesting. Interesting. And so why do you think she was seeing you for the first time? Like, what was it about that?
Because her consciousness would, the development of her consciousness at that time would only let her see what society had structured, and here he was in that context. And this head was wild. You know, it had woolly hair, and it was kind of like a bloke that if you went into the pub, you'd want to have a drink with him.
Yeah, wow.
It didn't look like him, but now he could be related to that. So there was another layer of consciousness that could come through.
Yeah, which of course comes around, and I talk about awareness. Like, I think, you know, we don't know what we don't know, but when we do, there's a responsibility. And I think that there's this whole thing of we go around with a lot of blinders on our eyes, and whether that's intentional or not, conscious or not, I think that it happens a lot if you aren't intentional with or consciously going, you know, creating some of these things that create awareness. So in the way that I talk about that, I talk about the muscle of human intelligence, and I'm always saying we need to exercise that muscle. And the reason is that you know, that for me, human intelligence is the data in which we have within us. And that can come from how we see things, hear things, experience things, our DNA. There's so many different ways in which we have data with us. What we do with that data is our responsibility and a decision that we can make on a daily basis, right? And I think that when you talk about all of this and the fact that that person now can see, I think there's this problem where we are in a society where our focus is only on things that we have put priority on. So is it in the left drawer or the right drawer? And I wonder how we can, or what we need to start doing to shift that and go, I know it's not been the focus before, but what if it became the focus now? And I think that actually is, there's quite a distance between that, because as humans, we don't like change. And, you know, especially when it's uncertain or it's not giving the benefit that society has necessarily put on it, the value.
Yeah, I agree with that. I do totally agree with it. But if people, I don't know. See, I'm writing a book about seaweed, and I'm going to King Island, my home, and I think every week I'm always doing, so I've just been out and ironed some papers between some seaweeds. I'm doing some cyanotype, and I keep thinking it's an archetype of mine, seaweed, because since I was a little girl on King Island, actually that's really a very important conversation with you. Thank you. Because as a child, I went on the trading vessel my father had bought with a Polish gentleman as a cargo vessel between King Island, Melbourne and Tasmania. And when the boat arrived, we were all invited to go on it for a day's outing. We went up between these two islands off the north of King Island. And I just loved being on the boat. I remember everything about it. And I looked down into the water between these two islands, and I saw this seaweed wishing in the water, and the colours were just amazing. And I made this thought then, and I would have been about 9, if not younger. And I made this idea that when I grew up, I was going to come and live on one of those islands, the one that didn't have snakes, and I was going to have a flock of sheep and a helicopter in case a snake came across. And I was going to weave the wool, and I was going to dye it with seaweed. And it's so interesting. I mean, what was it about that seaweed that
Yeah.
But to this day, I have always noticed the seaweed. I've always understood. I have a language with seaweed, and I'm going back to do an exhibition on King Island next year and run a workshop. And people come. I've been once already. People come. They're so interested in it, but I hadn't wanted to do it earlier because the consciousness of the world. Like when you look at fish oil and you see, I've always worried about what will the humans do if they suddenly fall in love with seaweed? They'll ruin it. There was that, they'll overdo it. And they're already talking about filling the oceans with seaweed farms,
Yeah.
I mean, but you don't hear people saying, but there's only so many minerals in the water. How is that going to work? But it's always this more stuff that seems to gets us all excited. I can do better than everyone else in the street, or I can help other people if I can do that. There's all sorts of bargaining that goes on. So I didn't do it. I travelled and explored it. But then now I notice that the consciousness is rising around me. And so people are now eating it, and they're doing all sorts of things that we've been using in the medical world for years. But there is a message and a language from seaweed, which if people stop and look at it, it is incredibly beautiful. And it's like Carl Jung. I always, when I used to run workshops on, on art therapy, I used to start with a slide of a man in a boat, and he had a kind of like a pale blue suit on, but he had some goggles on, and he had his head down over the side, and he's looking under the water. But see, that's synonymous with the unconscious. So when you've got your eyes open, you're looking over the side of a boat, and you're looking below the water at the movement and everything, you're looking through into the 90-odd% that we don't use, that is in our unconscious. And we need some of that gently, because we are human and we're on this trajectory where and I must find a better word than narcissism, because it sounds like an insult.
Well, I think it's like anything. Like, the problem when we use words like that is there is already a box in which humans take that word and go, that's what it looks like.
That's exactly right. And I've often said for some years now, we need a new language, because we've killed this one in lots of ways.
I so agree. I really totally agree with that, because the more I'm communicating with humans, the more I'm realizing that just because I say it this way doesn't mean that it's received in that way, or even that that's how you're thinking about that. And so, but here's the thing, even when we talk like this, what comes up in my brain is, but we're so afraid as humans to ask questions. So like, I ask questions not because I'm wanting or anything from you, or I've got an agenda from you. I really truly don't have it when I'm asking questions. I want to know what you're thinking. I want to know how you're thinking. I want to know what that means for you. And it's really difficult, because this is not how we function as a human race. Like, we really don't. Like, there has always been, if you ask that question, you're wanting this.
Well, people, ever since I was young, I don't know if my father was a bit like that, but I remember having a boyfriend on King Island. I was probably in my 30s, and I remember him coming because he worked down the mine, and he was a lovely guy. And he said some of the other guys, one of the other guys that perhaps I'd never met, he said, oh, well, if going to her house for dinner, it'll probably be very deep, And he said, after he'd been 3 or 4 times, he said, you're just so simple. You're so simple in the way you connect with everything, and I always liked that, because I thought, why don't I find more people there? But I do wonder about our personal devices. I find that a lot of people are afraid of going deep, But now I think there's a new fear here, and that is people are not actually heard. Because
I
they're
totally
not to express anything more than just the nicety.
Well, your earlier story said that, like I haven't been seen. And now I see you kind of the moment. And I think one of the things that came out of the lens of using this, which is one of the white papers that I'm writing right now, and that is around the need for a new approach to leadership. And part of what came out of that is definitely this concept of, well, how do we communicate in different ways so that we can be seen, or humans are able to feel like they're seen and heard at the table? And I think that this is an interesting concept, because you see, if we see people, we may have to see through a different lens, and that is just in itself, there's a fear. And then if we are going to use a different lens, we're not used to using that lens. So that might open up conversation that we're not used to and don't know how to navigate, right? And I think that there's a fear in that and alone. And then if we are to actually stop and have different people at the table, so I always say have different distinctions at the table, then that's going to open up. But I'm not so used to doing it that way, or having that kind of thought, or that person thinking that way, or even being in the company of. And so because of that, there's another fear that comes to the table. And then we've got a lesson. You mean we stop? We don't talk? But you're not going to hear me if I don't talk first or get it all out. And so that is a fear that if I listen to someone else, you're not going to hear me. And so we've got all these fears that already bring so many things to the table that make it really difficult for us to even think about moving forward.
I agree with you. While I was listening to you, one thing that kind of floated through my mind was, what do we learn about someone else in silence? I've sometimes thought I'd like to run silent retreats here, so that you have a whole weekend where you maybe Friday night you say hello and have a meal, and then you have 1.5 days of not talking. Like, I have done that a couple of times, and it's amazing what you come away with. Like, I don't know if you've heard of the Vipassana.
I reckon Shelley, I know she's on here. Michelle, you're on here. I reckon Michelle and I should come to that. I'd love to see if we could manage even an hour of it.
Have you heard of Vipassana?
I've heard of, yes.
Yeah, see, those 10 days of no talking, I haven't done it, but I had a friend who did it, and I saw her the week after she came back, and I noticed the reason that was invented was to help people in business, was that, so that the monkey mind and everything else that we all have, that whole thing, like you had to, in that 10 days, you learn to sit with your discomfort, with whatever it was, whether it was physical or mental or whatever, and to kind of sit through it rather than kind of be moving around to it.
My only problem with that is this. I would want a notebook and a pencil. I really would, because I know you're not allowed that. And that's the only piece that I would really struggle with, because my brain goes crazy. And the reason I've been able to live with my brain and mean that I don't go psycho with everyone else around me is because I've learned ways to get that out of my head before the next idea comes, or before the next concept, or Michelle's laughing, because it's true. Like I could seriously, I've always thought I would love to do a 10-day thing. I'd love to do 20 days. I'd love to do, like, that sounds so good, but I wouldn't be able to do it without a notebook and a pencil, because I need to get it out of my head, because I get the best ideas when I sit with myself. I love sitting with myself. I do it frequently.
Yeah, well, you see, I, as an older person, I'd have to say, I'm pulling rank on you, Kerry Marie. You'll have
No,
to
you
forgive.
can do that anytime. I love it.
As an older person who has so many parallels with that, I'd say that you, Michelle, and I really need that without the notebook, and we would learn something else. And at the end of it, you would probably be amazed, as most people are.
No, I would have driven you nuts by the end of that.
No, you wouldn't want to. You'd be quiet. You'd be very quiet. But I would lay a bet with you that whatever you would have written down would have evolved into another layer of consciousness. That's my take home.
I don't know if it would, because I would get so frustrated by myself. I'd get so cranky with myself, because my fear is I get so many great ideas. I want to remember them because they come from something, and then it evolves. And I'm so visual. I mean, you go back to your art. I mean, one of the reasons is because sometimes we can't say it in words, but we can draw it, or we can experience it with what we put on that the canvas. And there's a massive creative side. Like you said before we came on, you go, I love that thing behind you with the books and the things. This is the other side of me who loves being creative, and design is a huge part of my world.
Yeah, I know, I see it, but then I have to because my mind is not unlike yours. When I was in the New York studying the mandalas, the Jungian ones, and we stayed in a nunnery, which is where she ran the workshop. So, and I stayed for an extra few days, and I befriended a nun who they'd actually given a tour of these tiny rooms that were bedrooms. And she had some children that used to come in and do art with her.
Yeah.
And she was going away for a couple of days. She loaned me these books of one of her favourite artists, who you and I both need. And I've got him here somewhere. His name was Frederick someone or other, but it's a handwritten book, right? And they're the most beautiful books, but they are a learning about consciousness because, and from memory, he took a workshop where he took this group out into nature, and he asked them to sit and to just observe for a period of time and then to draw, right? And so when he went around just to sort of see how they got on after a little while, he came to this one woman and there was nothing on her page. And he said, "Oh, you haven't drawn," because the idea was that sit with what it was you're going to draw until you have all the details, and then you sit and draw. And she said, "I don't need to now." And that was it. I've sat with it. I feel like I've become it.
And that goes back to what you said about becoming it.
That's exactly right. And that, to me, that's the ultimate. So anyway, I probably shouldn't be quiet, so you can see why. But
I find that intriguing, and I think that it creates an awareness within us that maybe I haven't become part of that, and I haven't had a willingness to sit in there and do that. Although I really love nature. I'm a bit like you, and I love the smells, the looks, it's one of the things that when I'm going for walks, I'm really intentional on not looking at my phone. As you know, there's times when I have to because of something like an emergency, or like I'm in a conversation, probably with Michelle, who's on here. But there's those moments. But in general, when I don't need to, I put my phone away, except for one thing. I will walk along and I'll see something and I take a photo of it. And I often take a photo because I want to capture that moment that I thought that, felt that, and I'll often go back to that place when I'm looking at my photos. And it's a visual reminder of where I went when I was on that moment. And I did it a lot when I was traveling across the world, because there was often days that were tricky. There was days of loneliness because you'd be in crazy random areas, and some days you just wanted to be hanging out with some people who got you and understood you. And I remember thinking in those moments, how can I, and I'm always figuring out, how can I make sure that even though this is not an ideal day of where I'd want to be or what I would be doing, how can I curate moments? And especially when life was really crazy and I might be going through a few challenges. And one of those things was, when I was across the world, was taking photos where I would literally, like there was a moment that was created and I wanted to capture it and remember it. I wanted to remember the smells. I wanted to remember the feelings. I wanted to remember the emotions I felt at that moment, or what I saw at that moment. And I think, this is a kind of an interesting concept, because we do things because, and it goes back to that intentional or not, or conscious or unconscious kind of thing. We do it because often that's what everyone else is doing. We do it because that's how everyone says we'll be happy or feel some sort of emotion. And I think that sometimes we've got to curate those moments, whether it's that moment where there's nothing around us, to take that in and get what that is, and like you say, become one with it, and sort of almost, what were your words on that? You said, I'm trying to think exactly your words on that, but it's and so we've got to get to that point, right, where we do that. And for me, finding that point of this absolute peace within me and feeling a part of it was when I would be able to capture something, not just visually, not just in my sounds, but also in the way that I feel. And I don't know, like, and I wonder if in some ways, if we're thinking of all our pieces, our phones, all the things that in some ways were distractions, we've actually gone away from being able to feel all of those things and understand that and create an awareness around that.
Well, I hear you, and I actually, I think that I'm hearing that from people every day. I think people, in one way or another, people are actually asking that the question you've just asked.
Yeah.
And I really do. And maybe that is the core. Maybe we've come around rather nicely to, how do we stop separating out our mind, our body, and our soul?
Yeah.
I mean,
which I think that this is the thing that has come out of using the lens of humanity as stakeholders, because we have gone as these individual pieces, and in most things, whether it's business, personal, whether it's in politics, whatever it is, we've looked at one area, and if we go back to that, that's the focus that we've given and a priority we've given. But we have to come back to us as a whole. So how do we now we're asking that question, now that we know, we've created an awareness around that, how do we do this? How do we start doing this?
Well, I mean, I was trying to think what we might talk about this morning, and I was kind of thinking, I've got some cliches which I won't bore you with because you will have heard them many, many times. And they're not much use because they don't change. And they're not much use, that's how life is. And it takes us quite a while to work that out, because we get onto those continuums and we feel like we're a fish that's being pulled through the water on a hook. And we are, to a degree, but it's about...
Wow, that's such a visual, by the way.
Yes, but it's about health, really, isn't it? It is about health. It's about our health and our wholeness, and it's about making some changes because the individual feels so disempowered and is becoming more and more disempowered. So it's that we've got to work on, is how do we empower individuals to take responsibility for their own health and to be less manic, I think, and more kind of at one with, which you know, I'm trying
So
to stop.
is it no, I love what you're saying. I think the empowerment of an individual, but then we've got to connect that empowerment of an individual as a collective.
I think we do, but I don't know what's happened. I think it's a big mess because of COVID.
Oh, I agree with you.
Mess because we've gone so far, and like there have been a few times in history where I've thought, oh, we're going backwards, again, we're going back. Some stuff seems to kind of step out and start to progress, and then something else happens and that pulls it back, but it goes back below the median line. And I think there's some of that happening now, and I think, and I honestly believe that what feels like it's all okay is not okay at the moment. I think, that's just how it is because the world has had to change a lot of things. So I don't know, and I love the work you do, Kiri Marie, because not many people have that, can float up and see. Because, like we've been talking about consciousness, there are layers of consciousness.
Yes, I agree.
And we live with the layer of consciousness which is quantitative, pretty much. And that's what the politicians use, and anyone who's arguing the case with energy.
Well, let's just say it's an easy thing to do because it's what we relate to in society. The masses relate to that, can connect with that. And I think that this is important because the reason we're doing it that way, it's not saying that it's a good way. I'm just saying the reason we're doing it that way is because as a society, we've gone, okay, we're okay with that as a general thing.
Yes. No, I get that. But how do we, if the public are asleep in that area,
correct,
and appear to be quite robotic,
yes, correct.
How do we wake them up, and how do we?
And I think this comes back to us educating and creating awareness. But I think that this is, and so then the focus comes around to what that awareness is. And as much as we can be awoken as individuals, we need to awaken within as a collective, because the only way I'm going to learn your perspective, your thinking, the things that have become so opened in your consciousness is if I am willing to listen to you and then go, wow, I really love that piece. And from what I'm already doing, I can add that will add value to where I'm thinking and what I'm doing. But we have to be open to having those uncomfortable conversations as a collective. And I think that that's where, I used to always go, well, I love the fact what we're talking about today. And I used to go, well, I can't wait for someone else to open up a platform for us to have conversations like this in the open public arena, because we have to make this uncomfortable kind of conversations where we don't really know what we're talking about, but we do know what we're talking about as individuals. And then we're evolving on this conversation. We need to be willing to do that. And I used to think, oh, great, it'll be awesome. I can't wait for someone to do that. And then the other side of it was, I really can't wait for people to have those uncomfortable conversations because there's a need for it. And I would go, I can't wait for people to have those uncomfortable conversations. And then on the other side of it, I would go, okay, this would be great if we do this as a collective and join a whole lot of amazing individuals that then have these uncomfortable conversations. And then we find something, even if we disagree with everything else, we find something we can connect on to change that focus, to shift what is happening across the globe from problem to solution in some form forward. And I go, that'll be great. I can't wait for someone to do that. And then I realized that someone had to start with me.
And you're doing
that if it correct. But it's not an easy journey. It's not something that I go, please pick me to be the one that does it. I was waiting for someone else to do it. And I think that we have to get to that point that we are so not happy to be status quo and settle for what is the norm and go, this, like you just said, this is not okay.
Yeah.
And I don't know that we've got to, I think there's some rumblings, and there's definitely, from the conversations I'm having on the decision table, I know there's other awesome humans who are thinking the same thing. And that is where we're combining and launching with the leaders movement. But here's the thing. I don't know that we are, as a human race, uncomfortable enough at this moment, because you have to be uncomfortable enough for change to happen. We see flavors of things starting to erupt. We really do.
The politics, the political behaviour covers up a lot of things and kind of glosses over them for people, like stimulus.
And our social media filters it, right?
It does. That's right. And that's part of the problem. But I don't know. It's not that simple, I don't think. But
and I think that's what we've got to come back to, is it's not that simple. But until we decide as individuals that we're going to own a piece of this, and as individuals then start connecting and collaborating as a collective, it is never, ever going to change. But it's got to start with some of us as individuals to get rived up enough to want to see the change.
See, I think at my age and my stage at the moment, I'm pushing for this seaweed thing. Is like it's like that man looking under the water. It's about it's a consciousness. Actually, you've helped me today. Thank you. Because I had a very good, very dear colleague said to me, seaweed's an archetype of yours. It's quite strong.
Yeah.
Strong. And I thought, what on earth does that mean? But I think it's a tool. Or it offers me, what is it, little lenses, as you call them, but I see them as kind of things with glass that start small and then open out under the water, and you kind of see, and there's a whole language. And then someone sent me from King Island, she's a lady that will come to the workshop next year, but she runs the cultural centre over there. And I've only met her once when I was over there, but she fell in love with seaweed too. So I said, oh, you've got the seaweed impulse, but so that's kind of part of my tribe. But she said, oh, Wendy, there's the kelp harvesters on King Island, and I found these pieces of bull kelp that have all these like kelp on them. And I said, oh, okay, so where did you find those? And she told me, and I said, oh, they would come up on hot rocks. And then the chemicals of the minerals and things, like as some parts dry more than others. And I said, oh, I know what the structure is underneath those. So it would run ridges, and there's these most beautiful spirals and little craters, and of course the salts gather kind of like to paint. So it's the Mother Nature painting. And so she sent me the images on the mobile, and I just wrote back to her something quite beautiful. I thought about it and I thought, oh God, the words are so lovely. It's about the ancestral, the oceanic ancestral communication. It is a form of communication, and it's very archetypal and Maori-like. Like she said, oh, it reminds me of the Maoris, and I said, well, it's very Celtic, which they all are. That. So yeah, I've forgotten why I told you that.
It's okay. You know what I love about this is that I think where you can have a voice and really bring change and empower you as an individual is through the seaweed and the things that you can take from that seaweed and teach. Maybe there's a different way in which we need to communicate and bring the communication of something that we don't know. I don't know much about seaweed. It
isn't actually.
I remember kelp as a nice thing to add to food, and it was a healthy thing. But I love the fact that you are creating some curiosity within me of what is the seaweed? What is it about it that she's seeing and learning? And maybe that's where you would be doing that with humans, going, maybe we need to develop this curiosity and we need to learn this consciousness from the seaweed side of it, right? To then be able to communicate in new and exciting ways going forward. And I think, well, that there's power in that. And I think that's just so beautiful, right?
Yeah, no, look, you're spot on. And I just saw the faces when I was over there. I looked after a Grand Designs house on the island. And I said, look, I'll come and run a workshop on seaweed. And we had 16 people. I only knew about 5 of them. The rest of them were all illustrious, wonderful people that were doing things that the islands have self-selection. And I saw their faces flash. And, I was going to take them down and do a seaweed mandala on the beach, but they didn't want to leave the room. They were, and I'd
that would be so amazing.
And they're wanting another one of those before I do the workshop over there next year. So, but the looks on their faces, and I get messages from them sometimes. They want to include, they want their health and that health. Do you know what I did? In this Grand Design house, they've got a bath which is up on a sand dune at the end of the house with windows, and there was a magpie outside and there's wallabies on the sand dune opposite. And I had put some kelp out on the deck in a bucket of water, and it formed a gel. So the morning that I ran that workshop, I filled the bath, and I thought, I'm going to have a bath this morning. So I walked down to the other end of this house, and I'd upended the gel into the bath, and then jumped into the warm water. And I sat there, and it was the bath of my lifetime, because in this Grand Designs house with the animals outside, the windows open, and I just felt so much energy, because the Egyptians used to do that, you see. And apparently it's a cellulose buster. Like because the minerals are in the water, and it's just the gel, so you're not floating around in the seaweed. So I went to this workshop, and I said to them to start the workshop, can you guess what I've done this morning? And I told them about this bath. Well, quite a few of them have been having these baths since then, because another way through the skin to actually, some of those minerals come through the skin too. But the ions are, when you go into the water, whether it's warm or cold, you feel so good when you go into the ocean. So you've got the ions in your bath as well. So
I love that. All right. So if anyone wants to connect with you and know more about what you do, how do they do that?
I didn't think that would happen. Well, I have an email address, and I have a mobile number, and I'm on Facebook. So if they want to through Facebook Messenger, I'd love to hear from people about what they're doing. If they want to know anything, that would be great.
That's Wendy Nash, right?
Yes.
Because you only put Wendy up here, so. Okay, so that's how they do it. We'll put it in the thing after, or Michelle could do that because she's on here. She knows the best way to do that. Michelle, that's a hint for you to do it if you're still on here. If not, we will make sure.
And Marie, I do want to say thank you for this opportunity. I've always...
We haven't quite finished yet. We haven't finished yet. So you can tell me that in a second, because I do want to ask a question. This is a question. See, Michelle is still on here. I asked this question to everyone. For some reason, my headphone's falling out. Hey, wait on. If I put that in, there we go. And I asked this question of everyone at the end of this conversation, and that is, what are you taking from our conversation today?
I'm taking, first of all, every conversation that I've ever had with you, I have always been changed by it to some degree, enriched. I feel an expansion and an affirmation, a confirmation that it's all out there. So in a way, you do expand consciousness. That's your role in life, is you're doing that with people. So I have to say that. and I love that, and I thank you very much.
Yeah.
I think the world is a better place for your being in it. And so what am I taking away from this? I'm taking away some thinking. I think you've expanded my book a bit too, or my responsibility. I think I'm going to visit my responsibility with what I'm doing, but I feel more affirmed with that too, actually. I feel that sometimes I've often I was born, when I was born, I always struggled a little bit when I was younger with how do I see things growing up on King Island, how do I see? And, of course, I saw the sea. And but as I'm getting older, like it's rather lovely getting older because you get braver and, you know,
I agree.
Courage grows and you just know stuff and you're not sweating the small stuff. You just know stuff. So, yes, I see that I'll keep going because I always have, I've needed rest for a while, but I can feel stirrings of what else can I do because I'm that bigger picture.
I'm excited about that.
Yeah.
I'm excited. I'm excited about I think for me, what I'm taking from this conversation, I really love the seaweed concept and what I love is that you've mentioned you're aged a couple of times, and I go, but what I think is so important is that we have the wisdom that comes from age, and I really long for it. I have always had people in my world as mentors that were way older than I am. And it was because there was ways in which you use different lenses and you have had different experiences and learnings from that maybe I haven't had. And I love it from both extremes, from the youth to the older generations. And I love to learn from it because I think Michelle says Wendy is very wise. She is, but like she's also, you've got access to things that I didn't have access because you've been involved in different things that I have never been involved in. I've never even been to King Island. So for me, that is, you're bringing a richness to the table in a way that I cannot come from. And I think that is where, as human race, we are forgetting to engage in that. We're forgetting to not see that as a threat, because I think we do as a human race, and go, what is it we can learn from? How do we develop all the things that we've talked about on the table today? How can we be more educated? How can we create an awareness around that? And for me, what you brought, and even just the concept of seaweed, it springs up a curiosity within me that goes, what could come from seaweed? Like, I've only ever just seen seaweed as this kind of thing that annoys me in the water when I'm trying to swim. I have not seen the beauty of it. And I think that's how communication can change, because we often see each other and our biases come into play. And we miss the beauty because we can't see beyond the annoyance. And I think that's what you've brought to my attention today, and reminded me of, I need to keep seeing the beauty in everything, because I think there's such learning in that, whether it's ugly on the outside. In the case of seaweed, for me, it was ugly because it got in my way when I was trying to swim, and I've not had this nice, happy relationship with seaweed, right? So for me, that would be where I would go immediately when I think of seaweed. But today you've opened up doors of, wow, is there so much more to seaweed than I've ever imagined before? And I think, well, what if we do that in our businesses? What if we do that in our personal life? What if we do that as a whole, as a humanity? What does that open us up to? To what consciousness would that bring?
Can I add one thing here?
You can add what you need.
There's one thing that's coming to mind while you're talking too, and I am listening to you, is that sometimes growing up and spending a lot of time kind of like where it feels like there's not enough stimulation. Then I've had that, and then I've also been very, very busy.
Yeah.
But I think there's something to add to even business, but it's how to learn how to unsee what you believe, because that's where the boundaries are good. We all need boundaries, but we need boundaries made of different material, so that we can allow to make shifts, because we see I'll tell you another little experience I had on King Island when Michelle was still with me on the island. I walked over the coast hills by myself, undulating coast hills on the island, and there was this little basin in the middle of one of them. There, it's always there. And as I came up over it, here is a newborn calf, still wet, not a cow around. And I can remember the feeling came into my hands as I went towards it, saying, "You darling thing." And I just stood there thinking, it's still wet. And it looked at me and its eyes were going like this. And then I noticed movement on the hill, and it was the mother. Now, did I have to run? And did that calf get up and become alarmed? I was fine. The cow didn't run after me, but the calf was ready to just be. I mean, you can bring all sorts of things to that. But what I'm saying is the calf learned from the mother to be afraid. And there's a reason for that. There can be good reasons for that. But I'm saying that we, like if you looked at humanity in terms of ages and stages, you'd probably say that, like I remember a guy coming from Russia, and he said about the architecture of Australia. He said Australia is a teenage girl. She tries on all different sorts of clothes because she's still trying to work out who she wants to be, and that's like the stages. And so it's quite relaxing to think, well, where's mankind up to? In our development? Are we 25 yet? Or are we 30 yet? Or are some cultures older? It's quite lovely, some of that. Anyway,
I love it.
Taking the conversation somewhere else again. I'm sorry.
And no, do not be sorry. That is what this is about, is for us to go wherever the conversation needs to go. And I think that this is a beautiful way in which we can finish the broadcast, is, this constant, that there is an evolving sort of journey ahead of us. And I think that this was what brings hope, that although this is our starting point, and although there's a lot of it's not okay, I think there's a lot of in what we have talked about and what we're talking about. If the focus changes, if there's a willingness to create a different consciousness, maybe there's actually lots of hope for the future for humanity. And I think that is exciting. And for me, that is so dear to my heart, because I keep thinking, well, I want to make sure that I'm leaving behind for the next generation and the generations to come, something that they can springboard off, not get, not find themselves lost in, or, have to put up with a lot of what is not okay right now. And I think that that's a beautiful thing, is that we have realized, as we've continued this conversation, that there are so many possibilities, but I think it creates the opportunity for us as humans to go, well, what are we taking on? What is our responsibility? And empower ourselves, and then do it as a collective. And I think that that's the beautiful thing. So I want to thank you for being willing to come on the decision table and just have a conversation, because literally we are just as if we were sitting beside each other in the same room. This is the kind of conversation that we would have. And I think that this is where the learning comes from, because I get to have these enclosed doors, but they're not out in the open so much. And so what we've done today is bring it out in the open. And I'm very, very grateful for your willingness to do that. And even though there's times where you're still trying to figure out, and I love the fact you're still figuring it out, it gives me hope that I can still be figuring it out this end, like I think that's so human. And we often think, you don't speak up unless you've got it all right and got it all sorted. And I think that this is part of that, a new approach is that we don't have it all sorted. We don't have it all figured out. We don't necessarily even know how to communicate it necessarily in the most eloquent way. But that's part of the journey of the evolving and finding what is that new language in which we can do that. So I'm going to end the broadcast, but I want to thank you so much for being willing to come on here.
Thank you. That you validated so much, you do, and enrich the world around you. And thank you. I'll percolate on this for a while.
I love that. I'll percolate. All right, I'm going to end the broadcast, but don't you go away for a second.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.